All right, so welcome once again, folks, to another edition of Sustainable Success, the podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Mark Asanovich. Am I pronouncing the name correctly?
That's correct.
And Mark was a strength coach in the NFL for 14 seasons. He's also coached and worked both at the elementary and the high school level for physical education, and also has his own facility where he trains people, I believe, one-on-one training for the most part.
That's correct.
And I'm going to say, met or became acquainted on social media, which is a cool thing. And I realized we had a lot of mutual friends, and Mark was gracious and agreeing to spend some time with me today. So maybe Mark, start sort of at the beginning. And when did you first start being interested in strength training, or your athletic roots and background? Or how did you come to be where you are today?
Well, I was one of those guys who in athletics had no talent, so I had to be the try hard guy, the guy that would have to go whistle to whistle and just make up for my lack of talent with more effort. And to do that, I had to be in better condition than the other players. So I got into training, and this is back in the mid 70s. So I'm reading all the muscle magazines like all young boys do, and trying to get information, and went on to college. Did not play college athletics. I did play club athletics. I played rugby when I went on to college, and got into teaching, got a degree in education because I knew I could coach. I wanted to get into coaching, and got into coaching, and I was coaching football and track, and got very involved in the strength training side of it because I had some background there, and I thought I had all the answers. Of course, I didn't know anything at that time. Then after developing a few strength training programs, I decided I wanted to do that as a profession. So I was fortunate enough to get a graduate assistant position at The Ohio State University, and this in 1984, 1985. And that was when I was exposed to some strength training that I didn't know much about. And it was intellectual, it was science-based, it was not Olympic or powerlifting based or bodybuilding based like most of the strength training information. And I really was intrigued by it, met some very influential people, namely Kim Wood with the Cincinnati Bengals at that time, Teddy Lamborghini, who was the educational director with the Hit newsletter, Mike Gittleson at the University of Michigan, Dan Riley with the Washington Redskins, all very science-based coaches. And so as a young guy, being mentored by all those people, it changed my direction in strength training, diametrically opposed to the other side. So after Ohio State, I was the first strength and conditioning coach at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. Was there exactly 1 year and went back to the high school level. And I was there for 9 years. And in 1990, when I was working at the high school in Minnesota, Denny Green was hired as the Vikings head coach. He brought in Steve Wetzel as his strength coach, and I volunteered with Steve for 9 years working at their mini camps and training camps and stuff like that. And finally, 9 years later, Steve brought me on as his assistant. Very thankful for that, and was able to form relationships with coaches. When Tony Dungy got the job in Tampa, he asked me to be his strength coach. And then from there, I went on to, it was a season with the Baltimore Ravens and Jeff Friday. After that, I was for 7 years in Jacksonville as the head strength coach. Jack Del Rio was the head coach at the time. Of course, I had trained Jack when he was with the Vikings. And after that stint, I finished my professional football career in the UFL with the Hartford Colonials. And after that time, my wife and I decided all the nomadic lifestyle was a little bit too much for our kids. So we moved back to Minnesota, and um, where she has a big family, and we have our kids being raised around cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff like that.
So now, and today, when you
Here I
train,
am, and I've got my own, like you say, my own.
oh, sorry, our connection seems to be, okay. Sorry, you cut out for a second there.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say, so today, when you talk about high school and whatnot, so here in Canada, when we think about somebody doing coaching in high school, we think about a phys ed teacher or somebody teaching intramural. But I understand in the United States, particularly football programs like that, even high school football programs in the States, would have a budget that would be way more than anything most Canadian high schools would have. They would have hired strength coaches. So were you coaching primarily sports teams, or were you coaching just the regular students?
Well, usually a strength coaching position at the high school in the United States entails during your teaching day, you're teaching all the strength training class. After school, that's when the sports come in, and you coach the individual sports after school. And they probably do have a higher budget. Um, but there's a lot of money raisers that are going on along with that. So,
Right. And today, you mentioned that you're teaching now at the elementary level, but you also have your one-on-one training. What's your clientele now, your clients, the people who come and see you? Is it athletes? Is it like myself, an older population who are just looking to maintain functional ability and quality of life, or is it a combination of all of the above?
I've got the full gamut. I start at 9 years old and I go all the way up to 83.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So 9 years old, these are parents who have a gifted young person who are trying their best to, increase his odds of succeeding in a potentially professional career, or at least college scholarships and things like that. Would that be your typical young person?
I think sometimes you have parents like that that are encouraging their kids to lift. The thing, my message to parents is that the athletes strength train to improve performance, but from a mom and dad's perspective, you strength train to prevent injury, because we know that when you train muscle tissue, bones get thicker and stronger, tendons and ligaments get thicker and stronger, the actual sheathing around the joint becomes thicker and stronger. So by increasing the strength of the athlete, you also increase the protection around all those joints. So if they do get injured, the injury will be less severe and they'll come back faster. And of course, it's a two-edged sword too, because as muscle increases its force capabilities, that increases power, which translates then into performance.
Right, right. So, and now with the older clients that you have, their goal, as I said earlier, is probably functional ability, quality of life. They're probably not that concerned with ever walking onto a bodybuilding stage or winning a powerlifting competition.
Yeah, exactly. It's at that point, and I've just recently turned 63 myself, and that's my goal entirely, is quality of life. And I tell people my age that there is no exercise known to man that will give you the physiological adaptations as will come with resistance exercise. It's the fountain of youth. And if there is such a thing as the fountain of youth, you're going to find it in a weight room. And so I think more than any other population, I think senior adults need to be steered in the direction of resistance exercise. Unfortunately, most of the information and messages they get is this cardiovascular exercise. That's what they need to do. And it's really the opposite of that.
So now, interesting, you said you recently turned 63. When's your birthday?
May 20th.
May 20th, so very recently. I'm much older than you. I turned 63 on November 21st last year. So
okay,
interesting.
Okay.
Yes, so you're right. And I of course, cardiovascular, I also think in many cases, I will concede that I see some benefits to some steady state activity, but I get a lot of clients that are kind of beat up from having done various steady state activities and participating in sports in general. As a matter of fact, virtually, I find that the clients who come to me who have never exercised or never been really athletic, by and large, this is a generalization, of course, are less beat up than the people who have been long, either participated in sports, or especially, of course, runners and things like that, especially when they get to our age. If they've been running and doing things, they almost invariably have joint issues. Your experience, I would guess, has been similar?
Oh, absolutely. Because the pounding from steady state body weight type of exercise, that's cumulative. And so the seniors I see that have had a history of that, I see a lot of low back issues. I see a lot of knee issues, ankle issues. So, and you're not going to get that with resistance exercise if you do it properly.
Right.
So I see senior adults mainly suffering from what I call EDS syndrome. It's exercise deficiency syndrome. And we need to, steer them back into the weight rooms. Because like I say, I think you're going to get more physiological bang for your buck doing that than anything else. Now, I do agree with you, though, too. Just doing anything, getting up off a chair and doing activity is going to be beneficial. But if you want to get the most out of your training, I think it's in the direction of resistance exercise.
Well, I think if you're completely sedentary and you go from completely sedentary to virtually any kind of regular activity, there will be an improvement. But then if you then think, well, if a little bit is good, a lot will be better, and you just keep doing more of that activity, then I think you reach a point of diminishing returns very quickly, and then it gets into more destroying the body than doing it. So today, I mean, based on the people you've named and whatnot, and that you've been influenced by, are you ever puzzled by the fact that science-based, evidence-based exercise is still very much unknown to most people? Like if you go on YouTube and you listen to the various experts and things like that, and even what's taught in universities, things like the benefits of explosive training and all sorts of things, why do what you and I would probably call old myths are so prevalent, and if anything, they're more popular than ever, and yet science-based training always seems to be such the exception? Do you have any theories as to why that's the case?
I'm just as baffled as you are, Richard, why science doesn't take precedence, because you look at most industries, and what marks most industries now are scientific or technological advances. And you look at exercise, the industry, and it's going backwards. I mean, are you kidding me? Kettlebells? I mean, that's where we are right now. Um, the the only thing I can think of is people aren't willing to learn. They're just going to continue to do the same thing that they see. I know that athletes are greatly influenced by successful athletes. And if the champions are doing silly, non-evidence-based stuff, they're going to copy. It's a copycat industry, coaching and athletics. So they're going to continue to copy this stuff over and over again. And it's really frustrating. People ask me, would you get back into the NFL? Well, I would, but I would have to work for a cognitive coach like Tony Dungy, who understood the physiology behind what we were doing. Most coaches don't take the time to understand that. Most coaches default to what they did in their past or what the champions are doing. And you have this vicious cycle that just keeps perpetrating itself over and over and over. And what was interesting to me is after I got out of professional football, I spent a year with a company out of Tennessee that traveled me around the country, and I'd speak at clinics on strength training. And the name of the clinic was evidence-based strength training. And I would just talk about the basic principles of overload and progression and variety in your training and doing proper repetitions, quality over quantity. And this just blew people's minds. They never heard stuff like that before. And they'd come up to me afterwards and say, where did you get all this new information? And I'd have to explain to them, this isn't new. This is what science has always taught us about strength. So it's perplexing, no doubt.
I have a book back there that I had when I was a teenager, and I went out. I found it online, and I ordered a used copy. It's by George Kirkley. It was written, I think, in 1963, and it's just called Weight Training and Weightlifting. And yes, there are some parts of it that deal with the Olympic lifts and things like that, because back in the day, they sort of thought of weightlifting and weight training. But by and large, it's interesting, the recommendations in that book are much closer to what you and I do than what is being espoused for the most cases. So, yeah. Having said that, that's typically, most of my senior clients who are coming in, many of them don't have a background in athletics and whatnot. They don't know, they haven't been tainted one way or the other. They don't have strong convictions. And so they just say, if I go into a gym, I look at all these machines and all these things, I have no clue what they do or how to do it. So that's why I'm here, to have you help me and put me in the right direction. I just want to stay away from walkers. I want to stay away from long-term care facilities. I want to be able to keep golfing into a ripe old age. I want to be able to play with my grandkids. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a 63-year-old untrained individual, I come and see you, what would my routine look like in your facility in terms of volume, frequency, number of exercises? Would you have me training once a week, twice a week? What would it look like?
Well, the first thing I'd want to do is, and you don't see this very often, but I want to sit down. And I actually have homework. I'll say, before I train you, you're going to fill out these sheets, and on the sheets they're asked what type of medications that they're taking, because if they're taking beta blockers, you need to be aware of that type of stuff. So you need to know what kind of medications that they're taking that may affect their exercise. They're asked their goals. I ask what they've done in the past, because I think I need to know that. And then what I would do is I would start them. I would tell them, if you want to get maximal results, well, it's not too hard to think that you have to put in maximum effort. If you're sedentary, you're not going to take them to an absolute maximum effort, the first time you're in the gym, because first of all, that would scare them, I think.
Yeah.
And not to mention getting really sore and stiff and all that stuff. So it's got to be a stepwise process where you start them. I'll give you an example. I was training he was actually a lumberjack in northern Minnesota. And he came in and he had been very sedentary for the last couple of years, took no medication at all. He was 80 years old at the time, and he just wanted to start feeling healthy again. And he had some orthopedic issues we had to work around. But what I told him when he first came in, and I said, Clarence, when we're going through a set of exercise, and I taught him how to do proper reps, if you feel anything at all, even if it's an itch, I want to know about it. Okay, so he'd start off on an exercise and he'd go, oh, I'm starting to feel something. I said, oh, we're going to stop right there. Okay, so we did that for about 3 months. And then he came in and after 3 months, and I said, well, Clarence, now, with that point where you start to feel something, we're going to go one more rep. Okay, so he'd be working and, oh, I'm starting to feel it. Okay, let's get one more rep. Okay, we stop, move on. We did that for about 3 months. And I said, well, Clarence, now we hit that point where you start feeling, now go 2 reps into that. And so slowly over a year, we got to the point where he was training extremely hard, just like I would my adolescents that I trained. When he reached the point of a maximum effort, he would ask me to help him through some forced reps. Now, this guy's 80 years old, and a lot of people that age says, I think we miss the boat when we don't give people the dignity to train hard. When I see these people in the pool and they're doing this stuff, God bless them, at least they're doing something. But we have to give people, older adults, senior adults, the dignity to be able to train hard when you can train hard to get the maximum results. So that, as far as what we did with him, it was a total body routine. So we would train all the muscular structures of the body. I start at the neck and I don't finish till I get to the ankles. So there's probably about 10 to 12 exercises that they're doing. As times Clarence would come in once a week. We charted his progression every time he came in. We had him in a moderate weight, moderate repetitions, generally anywhere from 8 to 12 repetitions. And sometimes I would do variety with him. There's overload protocols that I, are multiple sets. The majority of stuff that I do is single sets, but to keep it fresh and bring variety into the training, we do a number of overload protocols. I'm fortunate to have enough equipment where we actually rotate them through 4 different total body training cards. So when they come in, they'll do the first card. Next time they come in, they'll do a second card, then they'll do a third, then a fourth, and then we'll go back to the first. Again, I think when you train really hard to avoid staleness and monotony, and just because it is hard, you need a little variety.
Right.
So maybe we would do a true squat one day for the hips and quadriceps, and next day they're doing a leg press.
Right.
So we change it up a little bit. But when you talk about volume and frequency, obviously that's going to tie in it directly relates to the intensity of effort. When you train hard, you can't train long. So most of my sessions are at most 30 minutes. And as far as the frequency, if you train hard, you can't train as frequently. I know those 30 minutes are the worst minutes of your day, but you're done. It's efficient. And well, I'll tell you a story. When I was in Tampa, we signed a wide receiver. His name was Keyshawn Johnson from the New York Jets. And Keyshawn came in and he was going to impress the dumbbell coach. The first day he came in and he told me, Coach, I work out every day, 2 hours a day. And my response to him, and he didn't like it, was, he ain't training hard. And what are you talking about? Well, if you're training hard, you can't train 2 hours a day, because if you train for 2 hours, what we can't do that. And he got a little mad. So he was a player that wasn't in Tampa. So he was living in Los Angeles at the time. So I wanted to see what he was doing. And so I flew out to Los Angeles because he was going to be a key guy for us in our offense. And I wanted to make sure that he was set up and was training correctly. And he had a really nice gym actually in his house. And what I did is I brought a stopwatch with me. And when he would start to train, I would hit the stopwatch and to, take the time. When he stopped the set, I would stop the stopwatch. And we were physically in his weight room for 2 hours. But when I stopped the stopwatch, it was 42 minutes. The other time he was getting a drink, he's on his cell phone, he's doing, talking to his wife and kids, doing all that stuff. And I showed it to him. I said, he actually did train with a little degree of intensity. We improved it a little bit from what he was doing, but when you train hard, and I'm talking about a maximum effort, I'm talking about when you can no longer in good form perform another perfect rep, taking it to that point where you can't push or pull it anymore. When you train that hard, you can't train long and you can't train as frequently.
So as your own training, as you've gotten older, have you modified? Are you still doing the same thing you were doing 10 years ago in your own routine? I mean, what has changed?
The only thing is changed with me is the frequency. Because as you age, I think you need to get a little bit more recovery. I think I trained just as hard as I did when I was 27, first learning how to train. But what's interesting is when I first started strength training, I was on the old Bulgarian 6-day, 2-day-a-week program. At that time, the Bulgarians were the best weightlifters in the world. So, I was going to copy what they do. And when you're young and dumb like that, and I'm pretty type A and regimented with my self when it comes to working out. So I did it. I did the 2-day-a-week, morning, evening, all through high school. And I did get some results. And because I got results, it kind of became a personal thing. Don't tell me it doesn't work. I got results. And then I go off to college, and those of you that have been to college know that you're not going to fit the Bulgarian 6-day into a college schedule. I mean, you're doing work study, you're going to class, you're going to the library, you're going to the lab. There's just no way. So emotionally for me, I was like, my roommates were talking me into the 4-day split routine. We're going to go Monday, Tuesday, take Wednesday off, Thursday, Friday, then we get the whole weekend off too. And Richard, almost immediately, my results, my strength, and even a little hypertrophy automatically went up. Now, again, I told you I was young and dumb at the time. So I'm thinking, oh, the Bulgarians don't got it. It's this 4-day split routine. That's right. The secret. Okay, well, so I do that all through college. And now I graduate college and I get into my professional life, and I get married, and now I have family life. And all of a sudden, the 4-day split routine, that really doesn't fit into life. 2 hours a day every time you go in there. So that's when I was first exposed to 3 days a week doing one set per exercise per muscle group at the highest level of intensity you could go. Okay, kind of the Nautilus principles at that time. And I
Yeah.
thought, this isn't going to work. Automatically, my results again went up. I reduced my frequency, reduced the number of sets, and again, I went up. So over my life, what I have done is I've tried to maintain the intensity, but now at 63, when I turned 63, I was training once every 5 days. Now I train once every 6 days, and my results continue. It's like the more time I take off, it seems like the better results I get.
It's interesting. I know a couple of people you may have read or seen their posts or listened to podcasts by Al Coleman and Fred Hahn,
Mhm.
who they'll say twice a week across the board is better than once a week. And then I think of other people like Ryan. I think it's Ryan Hare. I'm maybe getting the name wrong. I am getting the name wrong, but I forget now, who says once a week is better. And the problem I have with either of those is the blanket sort of recommendation. Because to me, if you're 23 or 63, or some people are naturally gifted, have better recovery abilities than others, and may be able to train more. And then, of course, if you're also participating in a sport, or if your job is manual labor, and whatever stresses you have in your life, I really struggle with the idea of any blanket recommendation. It seems to me that you have to, customize it to each and every individual based on who they are and the other circumstances in their life. The other thing I struggle with too is when I hear people say better or better results, I think, well, what do you mean by that? Because do you mean I'll get to my genetic potential a little faster than I would have gotten there otherwise? And if I'm going to train for the rest of my life, which, that should be everybody's plan, not just to get in shape for this summer to wear a bathing suit on the beach, then if it does take you, even if a little longer, to reach your genetic potential, I kind of land at who cares, because I don't think you can go beyond your genetic potential. So as long as you're progressing on a regular basis and you're not beating up your body in the process.
And I think bringing a balance between training and life too. You see these people that are into cardio fitness. I've got a good friend that he'll put in 50 miles a week, but he justifies not going to his daughter's dance recital because he's investing into his health. And I think you have to, when you're talking about training in life, achieve a balance, a healthy balance there too, because if you're overly compulsive, obsessive with your training, you're missing out on a lot of things in life too. So if you're doing the type of things we're talking about, being very efficient in your training, then you have so much other time to do the other things of life.
Well, it's bona fide addictive behavior, especially when you give the example. My guess is that as a matter of fact, I would probably be willing to put a small wager on this, that your friend who runs 50 miles a week has physical issues as a result of doing that, and yet he ignores them because he's so convinced. One of the topics that I've become very fascinated by, not just around exercise, but many different things, is the idea of cognitive biases, and how people that we think we're thinking rationally when you stop and consider all the various cognitive biases, like you said about people following the champions, that's kind of like either appeal to authority, or it's just, the majority rules, whatever everybody else does and things like that. But also when I see people like a cognitive dissonance, I think if what you're doing for exercise is hurting you, there's something wrong with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? And yet people almost wear
Exactly.
it as a badge of honor. Sometimes they'll even brag, in a social setting to sort of let other people know that they work out. They'll work it into the conversation about how they hurt their shoulder trying for their new personal record on the bench press. But, they're working with a physiotherapist now, and they feel that they'll be able to beat their personal record next month when their shoulder gets better. And I'm going,
Yeah.
But you're missing the blatantly obvious that's right in front of you.
And you take a look at down in the United States, the CDC looked at strength training related injuries. And over the last 20 years, those injuries have increased over 50%.
Oh, interesting.
Now, this is something that should be enhancing health.
Right.
It should never, ever endanger health. Strength coaches on the pecking order, we're healthcare professionals, and at the top of that order is physicians. And physicians take the Hippocratic Oath. And the third tenet of the Hippocratic Oath is primum non nucre, first do no harm. Well, even though strength coaches are the bottom feeders in this hierarchy, we have to take that seriously too. And when we prescribe exercise and we know it to be risky, we always have to default to the safest way to do it. And again, people aren't doing that. They're following the crowd and doing what the champions are doing. And the thing they got to understand is I work with genetic freaks for 15 years, and I could have done everything wrong with them, and I didn't, but I could have, and they still would have been champions. They still would have been Hall of Famers. But yet there's that inference that's made that if he's successful, it's got to be because of what he did in his training. And we just have to break people of that cognitive bias that you talk about.
Well, the other one of it is the hidden graveyard, is how many other college kids could have been great and could have become household names, but ended their careers by
because they're hurt in the weight room.
They got hurt. They got hurt in the weight room. I don't know if you know the name Jeff Casebolt. Jeff is, if you know the Gluteator, the machine.
Oh, yes.
So Jeff works with Dynavec. He is one of the guys who designed it. And when I did a podcast with him, he gave me an interesting stat. He said only 15% of Americans get the amount of activity, the 10,000 steps. I don't really buy into that 10,000 steps per se.
Yeah.
But he said only 6% of Americans do any kind of strength training. And of that 6%, half of them have an unhealthy relationship with the weight room. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, either they're obsessed by it, they're going all the time, going to weight room, or at the very extremes, they're involved in drugs in order to do that, which is, when you said earlier, it truly is the closest thing, I agree with you heartily, to the fountain of youth. And yet, for the most part, it's either being ignored or done improperly, or worse than done improperly, done obsessively, or to me, the very worst thing, which is really heartbreaking to see, is young people that are getting involved with drugs. And to do that. I always find the drug thing, I mean, if you're potentially going to have an NFL contract and doing drugs might make the difference between you getting there or not, I don't endorse that, but I can understand. But if you're just a young guy who's trying to impress your buddies at the bar on Friday night and you're taking a chance, then again, you think about cognitive biases or cognitive dissonance, it just makes no sense whatsoever.
And that's, that's our cultural, we're getting into our cultural obsessions of appearance and cultural obsession with sports. And so, they certainly bleed into the training sometime.
So I'm going to be mindful of time too here. What I was going to ask you about is one of the things that's become more and more obvious and prevalent in the science that I'm reading is that the benefits of strength training, proper strength training, go way beyond just getting bigger and stronger. It has effects on all sorts of things, how we handle glucose and mental health and cognitive and things like that. What have you found to be the case as far as improvements beyond just getting bigger and stronger and better functional ability for your clients, particularly your older clients?
Well, the research over the last 20 years has been fascinating because prior to that, a lot of researchers really weren't into the strength training aspect of it. And you've got to understand that years ago, strength training was to be associated with strength training, it meant being in dark, damp, dirty gyms with these big one eyebrow guys that smell bad and grunt and groan and stuff like that. Certainly these PhDs did not want to be associated with that type of activity or individuals and stuff like that. It was much more scientific to put on a tie and put somebody on a treadmill and measure gas exchanges, and that was more scientific than this other stuff. But as we started to learn more about it, I couldn't deny the physiological effects and the plasticity that people had when they used resistance exercise properly. So over the last 20 years now, we've seen that. I opened the show talking about how there are more physiological benefits of resistance exercise than any exercise known to man. And Richard, you already spoke about the muscle getting stronger and bigger. You talk about resistance to insulin. When you strength train, a lot of diabetics have reduced their medications because they're more insulin sensitive. The mental aspects of training. I think a lot of times we try to separate the mind from the body, but it's one organism. And we're starting to see is that if the body is healthy, the mind is more functional. I know that I was listening to a podcast of Doug McGuff, a doctor in South Carolina, who I really admire his work and in exercise and stuff. And he was talking about how medical people are looking at muscles as the biggest endocrine gland in the body, because we used to know that there was an association between when muscle tissue was trained, and then another system like the skeleton would also get trained, and another system like connective tissue. Now we know it's the cytokine communication that's going on, or myokines that are being released from muscles that communicate with these other systems and stuff. Just fascinating stuff right now. But even from a cardio standpoint, we thought, oh well, if you want to train your heart and lungs, you go do their muscles and you do weightlifting exercise. And we now know that that if you strength train properly, you will get just as much, if not more, cardiac benefit from resistance exercise as you will doing cardio exercise. And a lot of that came from target heart rate ranges. We were told that in order to get a cardiovascular adaptation, you had to get your heart within a target heart rate range. But what we were looking at there was cardiac output. So what makes up cardiac output is stroke volume, the amount of volume coming around to the left ventricle, and heart rate. So heart rate times stroke volume is cardiac output.
Right.
Well, when you're doing, your heart functions much like a sump pump. What goes in the right ventricle is proportional to what comes out the left ventricle. So when you're doing steady state cardio exercise, there is not a lot of venous return to the right ventricle. So it's going to be proportional coming out the other side. So if you want to increase cardiac output, heart rate has to go up. Okay. When you do strength training, resistance exercise, there is a lot of venous return to the heart. So now we have just as much cardiac output, but the heart rate doesn't have to increase proportionally like it does aerobically. So again, what drives the heart and lungs is muscular mechanical work.
Right.
So if you're training the muscles, you're also training the heart and lungs. And so, again, resistance exercise is going to get you more physiological bang for your buck than anything there is out there.
So, and have you read Ken Hutchins' book called Heartstrong?
I haven't. That's on my list. I haven't got to it yet.
Yeah, so you're describing probably a lot of what is in that book, which interestingly, he gives me a mention in that book, because the other thing is when the cardiac output is more, there's also, and correct me if I say something that's not scientifically sound to your understanding here, there's more perfusion, which creates more capillaries and more blood vessels because there's more output. And as a result, you can almost kind of create your own bypass. Because, if there is a blockage, but you have lots of capillaries. When I actually had a heart attack when I was 42, which turned out, thankfully, to be very mild. And I was told at the time that my collateral circulation was very good. And as a result of that, even though I had some arteries that were blocked, the ischemia to my heart was relatively minor because I was, there was places for it to go around the blockage. And I can't say this, but I think at the time I had been working out for a long time, and heart disease runs in my family. Because at the time it was explained to me is that it's not as common for a young man to have a heart attack, but if he does have one, a young man is more likely to die from it because he hasn't got that collateral circulation built up. Whereas the guy who may have had blockages for 20 years, his body has naturally been trying to adapt around those blockages and creating more of it. So he's more likely to have a heart attack, but less likely to die from it. I know that's a generalization. But then later, when I read of Doug McGuff's and the idea of venous return, and then read Heartstrong, and you think about the whole idea of getting the heart rate at a certain rate. Of course, we owe Ken Cooper with his fabulously popular book and series of books by the name of Aerobics. And at the time, I think the other thing was bodybuilders. I remember, we used to think, well, those muscles aren't really good. Those guys are muscle bound. They look good, but they're not as strong. They can't run because they're too muscle bound. And they're just, vanity. Those are vanity show muscles. And then, of course, if you really are into fitness, then internal heart and lungs, that's where it's at. And I find it interesting that you looked at a bodybuilder who basically looked like a Greek god statue compared to the marathon runner who often looked like he was hunched over and looked like he, was a Biafran. People would ignore the fact that one was the physical ideal and the other one was the undesirable one. But again, going back to cognitive biases, you look back on it now and you go, even without all the science, you should be able to look at one and the other and say, that guy's in better shape than that guy, right?
In fact, when I spoke around the country on my evidence-based exercise, I had a slide like that, Richard, where I would show the front line of the Boston Marathon. I said, this is the pinnacle of aerobic cardiovascular exercise. And you see these guys that just look emaciated. And then I'll show the front line of the Olympic 100-meter dash. And say, where is the picture of health here? Where is our perception of fitness right now? If it was the aerobic way or path, you can just, like you say, you can just see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what haven't I asked you about that you would like to leave us with a message for anybody? Is there anything you want to reemphasize, something you've already said, or maybe add something that I should have asked you about?
Well, I think that we're really missing the boat. The touch point in athletics right now is traumatic brain injury. And I've done, I've been influenced right from the start with Dan Riley's information on strengthening the neck. But over the last 12 years, I have done a lot of research on mitigating traumatic brain injury through head and neck strengthening. And we're just missing the boat again on it. That people don't understand the science because the neck controls all movement of the head, and a concussion is a result of a head acceleration, deacceleration injury. In order to decrease the acceleration of the head, if the neck muscles are stronger, science tells us on impact, it'll slow the head down. If we slow the head down, we slow the movement of the brain down. If we slow the movement of the brain down, we slow down the mechanics of concussion and the shearing that happens inside the brain. And I guess if I leave you with one message now for your audience, is that it's not just concussions are not just an athletic thing. Most of the concussions we hear about, most sport-related concussions, but actually most concussions in the United States are a result of automobile accidents. So I always tell people that, if you operate a motor vehicle, you need to train the muscles in your neck. And so, again, I would make that a point of emphasis in your strength training and it's not complex. It's not just like any other muscle. You have to put progressive loads against the function of that muscle. So if I wanted to increase the strength of my bicep, I would put progressive loads against arm flexion. Well, it would be the same with your neck flexors. If you want to increase the strength there, you must put progressive loads against neck flexion or neck extension or neck lateral flexion. It's not rocket science by any means. So I would just encourage your audience to take a good look at that and evaluate where they are as far as neck strengthening. Great
advice. Yeah, and I have right next to me here is my hammer strength 4-way neck. And
excellent.
I try to emphasize that. And I really want to thank you. This has been a lot of fun and educational for me, and I appreciate it. I will send you the video version just to look at for now. Later it'll be on a podcast more officially. And do you have a website or a Facebook page or something?
I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that stuff. I do have a Facebook page, and I call my company Pro Pump.
Oh, yes, yeah, Pro Pumped. I'm just going to write that down here. So if I search that on Facebook, I'll find a Facebook page.
Yes.
So you cut out there for several seconds. I probably interrupted you. So
No.
I was just saying, if I do a search on Facebook for Pro Pumped, I'll find your page.
Yes.
Okay, I'll include that in the notes. Once again, thank you so much for doing this, and I look forward to keeping in touch in the future.
Richard, it was a pleasure.
All right. Okay, bye for now. Have a wonderful evening.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye now.